Welcome back. I'm Rachel Baribeau.
And I'm Kevin Skarbinski.
And this is Baribeau and Scarbo. We are broadcasting live from New Orleans, Louisiana. We are also simulcasting with our partners, our friends, Cox Sports TV. You can go to coxsportstv.com. Their Twitter is Cox Sports TV, and can be seen in 2 million homes. That's pretty amazing across Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, Georgia, Florida, Virginia, Oklahoma, Mississippi, and they're growing. And so we're excited. Not only are we heard today, but we are seen as well. And that's a good thing because we have a superstar on campus on the show with us. And we want to thank Mr. Pat Forde for joining us of Yahoo. Pat, how are you?
Fine. Happy to be here with you guys. It's a great week of fun in New Orleans, that's for sure.
Are you busy?
Oh, just a little.
What stuck out to you today? It seems like today, Pat. Yesterday it was all the fanfare about the teams landing, and they're here. Oh my gosh, they got off a plane, they got off a bus, but today everything's starting. Everything we got to hear from the coordinators and some of the players. What struck you today?
It was interesting. The LSU players seem to be playing the no respect card, which is kind of hard to do when you're ranked #1 by a mile in the BCS. But I think they've certainly noticed that although they won in Tuscaloosa and they were the favorites when this matchup was first announced, that they're now technically the underdogs according to Las Vegas. And that I think is stuck in their craw to a small degree. There wasn't a lot of trash talk or anything, but you kind of sense that there's a little undercurrent of irritation maybe with that. Michael Brocker said something to the effect that, that's fine, we're going to see who the #1 team is on the field Monday night. And so the Alabama players were mostly, as I anticipated, fairly dull. Quite frankly, there wasn't a whole lot of there from them, and then they certainly seemed very task-oriented, like they're very much business at hand, and they're not coming here for bulletin board situations, that's for sure.
Pat, do you think, as you said, many people are picking Alabama in this game, and we talked to coaches. Terry Bowden yesterday said, it's just so hard to beat Nick Saban twice.
Yeah.
Nick Saban has an aura about him, despite the fact that he's lost 2 straight games to Les Miles. He's lost 3 out of 5 to Les Miles since Nick came back to Alabama. What would it do to his aura if LSU comes back and gets this game?
That would be interesting. It really might change that aura to a degree, Kevin. I think I looked it up. He's only lost to one team 3 times in a row twice, and that was back when he was at Michigan State when they lost a lot of games. They lost to Michigan 3 times in a row. They lost to Purdue 3 times in a row. Never happened in the SEC. By my accounting, he's 6-1 in rematch games against teams that beat him the last time when he's at Alabama. He was 8-1 at LSU in those games. So, and to me, the game that stands out more than any other in terms of a guy that uses a loss as motivation to get revenge was the Florida 2009 SEC championship game, when I thought it was going to be a slobber knocker like the year before, and they dominated the game. And I was just stunned at that. And you talked to some of the Alabama players afterwards, and they mentioned how much, this had been on their minds, and the coaches made sure it was on their minds all year round. This hasn't been a year time span, but I guarantee this game has been on Alabama's minds for the last 2 months.
We're visiting with Pat Forde of Yahoo Sports. Pat, you mentioned the LSU players taking that underdog role. I find that interesting because the Alabama players are also taking that role. Yeah. They're assuming that role. They were talking about this morning, the voters didn't pick us, but we're going to prove it to them on Monday night. And so that's interesting when you have 2 different teams trying to grasp at the underdog role.
Oh, yeah, sure. And you know what? Teams always want that role. Yeah. And now both of them kind of have an opportunity to have it. LSU is as a technical by Las Vegas point spread underdog, and Alabama because, there has been a lot of criticism of them getting a chance for this rematch game. I don't think either team's going to get a motivational edge from that, but it is interesting. And I think it's human nature, Rachel, that people aren't that comfortable in that favorites role, necessarily. And certainly you're wary of acting too confident in public in these situations, going, back to when Bear Bryant was a coach and every coach since then who built up their opponents to a great degree and tried to somewhat diminish their own team. It's kind of a tried and true formula, it seems like, in sports.
Pat, you meant the one player who wasn't dull for Alabama was A.J. McCarron, the quarterback.
I missed him. That was my fault.
Well, let me tell you, and I think it explained why we haven't heard from him more during the year, why he's been off limits to us. He hasn't appeared midweek at all, or Mondays when they do their regular media day, and he's only appeared after select games. And A.J. is a guy who speaks his mind, is very self-confident. Is he a player, if you start picking out guys, who's this game going to hinge on? And we know what Trent Richardson can do. We know what Tyrann Mathieu can do. But it seems like a guy like A.J. McCarron is a guy that, if he plays well, could be the difference. And if he doesn't play well, could be the difference in the wrong direction.
Yeah, no, I think both quarterbacks fit that mold. But probably McCarron even more because he's a little less proven still than Jordan Jefferson, who's a senior. And it's, I remember seeing some of his personality at the Florida game when he went after, I can't remember which defensive lineman it was now, that kind of cheap shotted him. Right. And then after the game, he talked about it a little bit. And so there may be a little too much personality there for Coach Saban's taste.
Well, that was the play. And that was the play where he came off the field and Saban got in his face and said, calm down. Well, he used an adjective in there that we can't use on radio, television, or in the newspaper.
Yeah, he sure did. But yeah, I mean, he's going to be a huge key to this game. And one of the LSU players, I'd have to look at my notes to remember, who kind of alluded to the fact that they thought McCarron left some plays out there in that game. He said where we left guys open and he didn't make the right read, in so many words. And, if he's making the right read, if he's hitting those passes, all of a sudden you're looking at least at shorter field goals, if not outright touchdowns. And in a game where big plays, I think, are going to be very few and far between again, there may be a couple more than last time, but still any play of 20 yards or longer is going to be probably have a huge effect in this game. And if he can hit some of those, that could change the tide.
Pat, do you think the onus is on Alabama here because of the mistakes they made in the first go round and the fact that LSU was able to capitalize on those mistakes? That's the first part of my question. And the second is, earlier in the week I sensed a little bit of a swell of media members picking Alabama, and you mentioned Vegas as well, and that's how it was the first go round. Yeah. And whether or not you say that affects you or not as a player, it does seep in. You're a human being. So I'm wondering what you think about that.
Well, and especially, what I think, these guys are going to be exposed to so much media over the next today and tomorrow and Saturday that they're going to hear it over and over and over again. There's so much more media coverage and so much more of that talk that I think it really does play on their minds more than maybe in an average week for an average game. As far as who the onus is on, I still kind of think the onus is on LSU because they've got to beat the same team twice, and we know how good Alabama is and how thin the margin was last time. I mean, while I was impressed by LSU finding the way to win on the road in that situation, they could have very easily lost. The pass from Marquise Mays is this close to being a touchdown or first down on the 1 yard line. The missed field goals, that sort of thing. So I do think from a pressure standpoint, probably there's a little bit more on LSU, especially even here in New Orleans. While that's an advantage, it's also we've got to win sort of situation.
It's interesting. We're visiting with Pat Forde from Yahoo Sports. Pat, it's interesting you mentioned that Jim McElwain, the Alabama offensive coordinator, was asked, are you preparing for this game as if it's going to be a road game? And he didn't hesitate. Yes. Really? Absolutely. Does that, and A.J. McCarron asked the same question and said, well, I figure it'll be 50-50, right? Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see. Well, not in the dome, because Alabama fans are notoriously good at getting tickets, and obviously this is LSU's backyard.
No, they're excellent at getting tickets. That's the only reason I think it won't just be a complete sea of purple and gold. And I was here in 2007, and Ohio State has a great following, but LSU fans had at least 70, if not 80% of that dome. And this, I think, will probably be a little closer to even because Alabama fans are ridiculously good at getting tickets and getting into games, and it's close enough that it's feasible. I still anticipate it being a little bit of an LSU home field advantage, but it's not going to be like it was in 2007. I wasn't here in 2003 when they played Oklahoma, but I think that was a pretty heavy LSU advantage.
I was here for that one, and it was hard to find Oklahoma fans. There were a ton of LSU fans there.
Pat, just a couple of minutes left, but you wrote an article about recruiting in the SEC and the domination. Is it a situation now where the SEC wants them, the SEC gets them? And you particularly talked about Bradley Bozeman. I've seen the kid play. Just a beast out there.
Is he? Yeah, it's a great kid to talk to, I tell you what. And Yeah, the point of the story is that there's just so many players in the South, and you can find them everywhere. And I went to high school, Edna Carr High School in New Orleans here, kind of an inner city school, and they've got a bunch of prospects, and they have a 6'8", 320-pound kid who's going to LSU. And then you go to the small towns in Louisiana or in Alabama, like Roanoke, Alabama, and you can find players there. There's just so many players in so many states, and yes, they want to stay home, and the home schools can get them. And even if a kid from Louisiana isn't going to LSU, he might be going to Alabama or to Auburn or to Florida. So I don't see that trend changing. I talked to some recruiting analysts who said, that this, if anything, it's just going to keep getting stronger. There's more good players down here, and the local schools are getting more of them. So the stage is set for the SEC to continue its, worldwide domination for a while, I think.
Can you narrow that down, not just the SEC, but these two schools, yeah, Alabama and LSU, continuing, and we see one or both of them in this position on a regular basis?
Absolutely. And I hate looking ahead to next year before this year's over, but most people are saying LSU's number 1 and Alabama's in the top 5. And you look at recruiting rankings, which I also hate, but I think they've become more reliable over recent years. Those two always have top 5 classes, top 10. I mean, if the coaching staff stay in place, it's hard to imagine these two schools are not going to be beating each other's brains in for a chance to play for the national title for years to come.
Pat, absolutely great stuff, and we appreciate you coming on. Tell everybody what you're working on. What's next?
What's next? Let's see. I've got a story coming up about Nick Saban in revenge games, and then a couple LSU kind of slanted stories on Steve Cragthorpe and what he's been through, the offensive coordinator or former offensive coordinator, and Jordan Jefferson as well.
Second to none, Pat, when it comes to getting those stories that no one else gets.
Thank you very much. Good to be on with y'all.
We appreciate it.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you.